Hey everybody, so today's video is going to be about Erik Prince and how it relates to Bannon and just the overall MAGA movement. So before I get going, or started, I'm going to play this video by the Majority Report about Erik Prince wanting to recolonize Africa.
In Europe, in the United States, it ultimately comes down to a contest of what is governance. Who is governed? Which countries are governed well? And if so many of these countries around the world are incapable of governing themselves, then it's time for us to put the imperial hat back on to say, we're going to govern those countries if you're incapable of governing yourselves, because enough is enough. We're done being invaded.
Because our own national security risk is at stake.
Exactly.
National security interests are at stake.
You can say that about pretty much all of Africa. They're incapable of governing themselves and benefiting their citizens because the governments there are all about looting and pillaging and lining their pockets and going shopping in Paris instead of actually
hold on a
making their country
second. Hold on.
better.
People on the left are going to watch this. They're going to say, wait a minute, Erik Prince is talking about being a colonialist again.
Absolutely. Yes.
So yeah, so as you can see there, or hear there, yeah, so Erik Prince, he's so Erik Prince, if you don't know him, he's like this mercenary guy, rich kid mercenary, who's right wing. He's kind of like right wing royalty, in a weird way. Like his mother was a part of the infamous Conservative Council for National Policy, etc., who essentially laid the foundation of just what we consider to be modern conservative politics in America, both past and present. So this video is going to be about Erik Prince, and my other videos were about Steve Bannon, Guo Wengui, Michael Pack, etc., and how they all interrelate. But now we're going to talk about Erik Prince, right? So, because he's kind of links up to the Steve Bannon thing, right? So Steve Bannon, Cambridge Analytica, right? So he was involved with Cambridge Analytica scandal with the Mercer family, who owned Breitbart. So after Cambridge Analytica got busted for, taking people's information to do like targeted campaign ads and stuff like that without people's consent, that the spinoff company was a company called Immerdata. On the board of Immerdata is a Hong Kong billionaire named Johnson Coe. Johnson Coe, interestingly, hired Erik Prince, who was also involved somewhat to the Cambridge Analytica stuff. But Erik Prince Johnson Coe ended up working for this company called Frontier Services Group, or rather, Erik Prince joined Johnson Coe's venture of Frontier Services Group. Frontier Services Group is important is because it's pro-China, and it's part of what we call the Belt and Road Initiative. So this information has actually been around for a while, but you just never really hear about it. And with the 2024 election coming up here soon with Trump, all the information is there, people, about why I truly think that the Trump administration is a lot more dangerous than what they're trying to sell to the public. And all we have to do is remember. So I get it. We're all busy. We all have things to do. There's more entertaining things out there. So my whole agenda, my whole goal for these videos is to summarize the data so you don't have to. That's it. You know what I'm saying? So you can make better informed decisions about the MAGA administration and about Donald Trump, etc. Right? Because I would consider the Donald Trump MAGA movement to actually be a part of a global conspiracy theory of global fascism, um, global right wing fascism. Uh, you know, it's not global communism like what the right wingers are trying to promote. Is actually the other way around. And for example, right? So why would Erik Prince be working for a pro-Chinese mercenary group unless he's playing both sides of the field? Because the people in power, such as the right-wing industrialists in the United States, are playing both sides of the field. They want conflict so they can rebuild both sides after the conflict. That's no different than what happened in World War II, right? So in World War II, you had Ford and ITT and Coca-Cola. You had big companies, right? Across the board, um, funding the Nazis, for example. Then once they did that, then they're also making money supporting the Allies and helping in the rebuild. So I feel like they're using the same model for the upcoming conflict that they actually have in store. And I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, Democrats are all about war with Ukraine, or sorry, war with Russia with Ukraine." But the truth is, and the conservatives aren't really shy about this. They want war with Iran, and Steve Bannon particularly wants war with China. So it's like, regardless of what party you're in, there's going to be some conflict. It's just that conservatives don't like the Ukraine war because, let's just be real, Russia is considered a white Christian country. And I think that there's a concerted effort in Republican politics to merge with Russia, which was interestingly foreshadowed in actual books of the past that I've talked about before. Even science fiction speculative books such as Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein, who interestingly himself, Robert Heinlein, was the inspiration, a lot of people argue, behind modern libertarians, but also modern left wing hippies, because of his kind of association with Southern California. Um, where else was it? The Laurel Canyon, things of that nature, right? But that's a whole nother theory. So to stay on track here, though, right? Erik Prince is going to be the subject of discussion, right? So Erik Prince, Johnson Co. So his mother is Elsa Prince. We also know Erik Prince of Blackwater. He was involved in something that we're going to talk about called Project Opus that deals with Libya, which therefore kind of loosely deals with what the aftermath of the Benghazi situation and the overthrow of Gaddafi, that conservatives kind of put all the blame on Hillary and stuff like that, when really it was, I think, a larger concerted bipartisan effort to overthrow Gaddafi. Um, so we're also going to talk about his Seychelles meeting with George Nader, and George Nader actually is a convicted pedophile, um, who organized this meeting in the Seychelles with Prince to supposedly meet with Russians. Um, and I think at that meeting they were talking about carving up Libya or the Middle East or whatnot. So some kind of very clandestine things were going on, in which Erik Prince for the Trump administration and Steve Bannon was kind of like a clandestine agent, kind of helping them forge their own kind of clandestine foreign policy outside of like the Pentagon and like the State Department. Um, so a lot of shadowy type stuff kind of was going on. Um, and let me see here. Yep, and that Seychelles meeting actually directly ends up connecting to Putin via a person named Kirill Dmitriev. So I think this might be a quicker video today. So let me see. All right, so we're good there. So where to even begin with this guy? Let's go to. All right, here we go. So which one's this one? Try to do the Seychelles one. So this is from the Huffington Post. So that's about the Libya one. This is the one we want. So here's what you should know about that secret Seychelles meeting. Robert Mueller has zeroed in on the clandestine affair in recent weeks by Nick Visser. This is back from March 8th, 2018. Wow, this time flies, right? And that's why it's important for us to remember, because you can almost argue that the whole RussiaGate Mueller investigation kind of threw a wrench in these plans without actively saying that that's what they were doing. he kind of like brought Bob Mueller in a weird way, even though I'm not saying that he's like some perfect person or whatnot, because he's establishment himself. But he kind of did leave a lot of clues for, I think, the public to kind of make up for themselves what was really going on with Trump and Russia, Israel, even Saudi Arabia, etc. So what we got here? All right, so a mysterious 2017 meeting in the Seychelles between a close associate of President Donald Trump and a Russian banker with alleged ties to Vladimir Putin has come under renewed scrutiny. So special counsel Bob Mueller has been gathering evidence about the rendezvous, which took place less than 2 weeks before Trump's inauguration. Mueller is reportedly looking to see if the meeting was meant to set up a secret back channel between Trump and Putin, the Russian president. George Nader, an advisor to the UAE, United Arab Emirates, who was at the meeting, has been cooperating with the Mueller probe, and it appears his testimony can help unlock several major questions about the affair. So here's what we should know about the meetings in the Seychelles. So what was a secret meeting in the Seychelles? The UAE arranged the meeting in the Seychelles Islands in January 2017, just days before Trump assumed office. The Washington Post first reported last April. The location may have been chosen for its relative discretion. The Seychelles is a kind of place where you can have a good time away from the eyes of the media, the country's Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs told the Post at that time. Erik Prince, a longtime supporter of Trump's campaign and founder of the Blackwater private security firm, met with a Russian official linked to Putin, although Prince has described the meeting as an unplanned chance encounter. So it's not clear what Prince and the official talked about, but according to the New York Times, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, eventual national security advisor, Michael Flynn, and then Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak discussed the possibility of setting up the communications channel in a December 2016 meeting, right? So think about that. According to the New York Times, Kushner, Michael Flynn, and the Russian ambassador discussed setting up some sort of like diplomatic ties between each other, some sort of way to communicate with each other. So, wow, okay. So the Washington Post also received an anonymous letter claiming that Kushner, Kislyak, and Flynn talked about arranging a meeting between a representative of Trump and a Russian contact in an unidentified third country. Talked about arranging a meeting to the representative of Trump and a Russian contact in an unidentified third country. So the Post, Adam Intos, told MSNBC that the letter said Flynn was deemed too high profile to do the trip. So these guys, I'm interjecting here, these guys haven't learned their lessons since Iran Contra. It's like the same people behind that, and from all my research over the years, are like still involved in things. And like you got to think that like Mike Flynn was like probably like a young soldier then or whatnot. Like it's like they just elevated themselves and they're continuing to do these kind of right wing clandestine sort of missions or whatever like that outside the privy of Congress and everything. So Kushner has denied the request took place. So let's read that again, right? So the Washington Post also received an anonymous letter claiming that Kushner, Kislyak, and Flynn talked about arranging a meeting between a representative of Trump and a Russian contact in an unidentified third country. Okay. So Prince met with Kirill Dmitriev, a Russian banker who manages a government-controlled wealth fund and is also thought to be close to Putin. So the meeting was set up by the UAE and the country's de facto leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. Nader served as a representative for the Middle East nation and had met Prince before, serving as a consultant for Blackwater. Okay, so there's this meeting in the Seychelles that was set up for the UAE with their consultant and representative George Nader, who also knew Prince because he consulted for Prince. This Nader guy was a consultant for Prince, and he later became a representative for the UAE government. So he's like a lobbyist, mover, pusher type guy, or whatever. So we have the UAE involved, this George Nader guy involved, Russians involved, Erik Prince Blackwater involved, Michael Flynn involved. So think about that. MAGA America, Russia, UAE are involved somehow in what was going on there. So Prince has said he went to the Seychelles as a private businessman and has denied the original report by the Post. He told the House Intelligence Committee in November that he had no plans to meet with Dmitriev, but Emirati officials convinced him to go to the bar at the hotel he was staying in to have a drink. So one of the entourage says, "Hey, by the way, there's a Russian guy that we've dealt with in the past." Prince told lawmakers, "He's here also to see someone from the Emirati delegation, and you should meet him. He'd be an interesting guy for you to know, since you're doing a lot in oil and gas and mineral space." He claimed they only spoke about oil prices and how much the UAE, quote unquote, wished for resumption of normal trade relations with the United States. What is Mueller investigating? Nader had been cooperating with the Mueller probe since mid-January and recently gave testimony about his knowledge of the meeting in front of a grand jury, according to a report in the Times this week. He allegedly served as a representative of the Crown Prince, and the Times notes that Emirati officials believe Prince was serving as a representative of the Trump administration transition team, and Dmitriev was an envoy for the Kremlin. So in an earlier story, Times noted that Mueller has widened the scope of his probe and is also investigating whether the Emiratis were attempting to buy influence with Trump. So Nader's secret testimony could contradict Prince's statements over the past year and shed light on the true reasons for the meeting. Okay, so there's that. All right, so we have Fox News and CNN. All right, so one side of the spectrum, the other side of the spectrum, as far as mainstream establishment news goes.
Tonight, the timing and proximity of meetings between Trump advisors and Russian officials during the transition is raising questions among Hill investigators, a congressional intelligence source tells CNN. In particular, whether the loosening of U.S. sanctions on Russia was discussed. The FBI is looking into a secret meeting on the island nation of the Seychelles, hundreds of miles off the east coast of Africa, according to the Washington Post. This is part of an investigation into alleged contacts between the Trump campaign and Russia. The Post reporting that in January, just before President Trump took office, Blackwater founder and Trump donor Erik Prince had a meeting in the Seychelles with a Russian close to the Russian President Vladimir Putin to arrange a back channel of communications between Moscow and the incoming administration.
There was no reason to find some Russian business person or some contact with the Russian government when you could easily have asked the State Department or the Obama administration to help create contacts that are front channel, direct between government to government.
Prince donated $250,000 to the Trump campaign, and his sister is the education secretary, Betsy DeVos. The White House said Prince had no connection to Trump, and Prince denied to the Washington Post that the meeting was about Trump. But even GOP lawmakers acknowledge the growing questions.
This is a centipede. A shoe will drop every few days. The latest meeting in the Seychelles. Look, this is a requirement, in my view, why we need a select committee in order to get through all this, because there's lots more shoes that are going to drop.
This is just the latest in a string of meetings between Trump associates and Russian government officials, including a meeting in December between Trump's son-in-law and aide, Jared Kushner, and a Russian banker whose bank has been under U.S. sanctions.
Thank you very much.
Ties between former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page and Russia are also under renewed scrutiny after revelations that Page was in contact with a Russian intelligence operative in New York in 2013. Court documents reveal a transcript of the Russian spy's account of a conversation he had with Page, who is referred to in the document as male number one. Speaking about Page, the Russian says, quote, "I think he is an idiot and forgot who I am," and, quote, "I will feed him empty promises." Page admits that he was in contact with at least one Russian spy in 2013, but claims he thought the Russian was working for Moscow's UN office, and he did not release any sensitive information. Page saying in a statement, quote, "I shared basic, immaterial information and publicly available research documents. In doing so, I provided him nothing more than a few samples from the far more detailed lectures I was preparing at the time for the students in my spring 2013 semester."
Sick of eating crap that doesn't fill you up? So was I, but luckily I found Huel's Black Edition, a cost-effective way of getting nutritional fast food. It's a healthy meal that comes in a bunch of delicious flavors. My favorite is chocolate. It contains all the vitamins and minerals my body needs to thrive. 40 grams of protein per shake and no artificial sweeteners. Add water, 2 scoops, and shake. It takes 30 seconds to prep and keeps me fuller for longer, all while helping me to achieve my health goals for only $2.50 per meal.
I talked to Erik Prince a couple of times today. He tells me he, quote, never, ever represented himself as a member of the Trump transition, didn't set up a back channel, didn't lie to Congress, and Adam Schiff just has his feelings hurt. Plus, as you might remember, he testified about this meeting a couple of months ago. Prince is a Trump donor, founder of Blackwater, and brother to Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. He says he went to the Seychelles back in January 2017 for a business meeting with the leader of the United Arab Emirates, and while there, spent 30 minutes with Kirill Dmitriev, a Russian businessman with close ties to Moscow. The Washington Post reports, quote, a witness cooperating with special counsel Robert Mueller told investigators the meeting was set up in advance so that a representative of the Trump transition could meet with an emissary from Moscow to discuss future relations between the countries. Prince denies this, saying it's a circular argument. Quote, if the left's fantasy of collusion is true, why does a meeting 2 months after the election matter at all? And he continued, his meeting with the Russian businessman only touched on U.S. relations with Russia. Prince said at that meeting, if Stalin and Roosevelt could come together to defeat Nazi fascism, then Putin and Trump could come together to defeat Islamic fascism. That, Prince claims, was the end of the conversation. He says he hasn't talked to that Kremlin-connected banker since. Today, Democrats pounced on reports that Lebanese-American businessman George Nader told the special counsel he was at the meeting, referring to Prince's earlier testimony. Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell told CNN he never gave the name George Nader. If he, meaning Prince, met with George Nader, he lied under oath. Not so fast, says Prince. He tells me that he told the committee he met with UAE advisors, of which Nader was one at that meeting. Now, back to Adam Schiff. Today, he said he wanted Prince to come back and testify about all of this, Sandra. I asked Prince if he would. He said there's just no need and that Schiff is just grasping at straws and has his feelings hurt because Prince, quote, scolded the Intel Committee for leaking classified information about him. Sandra?
Leland Vitter, thank you for those breaking details.
This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. The House Intelligence Committee has sent a criminal referral to the Justice Department for Erik Prince, founder of the mercenary firm Blackwater. House Democrats are accusing Prince of lying to Congress during his November 2017 testimony before the committee when he described a meeting in the Seychelles with a Russian banker before Donald Trump's inauguration as a chance encounter. According to the Mueller report, the meeting was an attempt to establish a back channel between the incoming Trump administration and Russia and may have been arranged by the Trump team. The move is one of the latest actions placing Erik Prince in the spotlight after more than a decade of largely working in the shadows after Blackwater shut down. In a major new report, The Intercept takes a look at Prince's latest actions, including his pitch to privatize the war in Afghanistan, his creation of a mercenary army for the United Arab Emirates, a history of mismanaged projects that have soured his relationships with leaders around the world, and his comeback made possible with the help of the Trump administration. He is also the brother of Betsy DeVos, the current education secretary. We're joined now by Matthew Cole, the investigative journalist who wrote the story. The article is entitled "The Complete Mercenary: How Erik Prince Used the Rise of Trump to Make an Improbable Comeback." Matthew, welcome back to Democracy Now! Talk about why you're focusing on Erik Prince today.
Well, I think part of the genesis of this story is that Erik Prince was sort of gone from the public eye for about 10 years, by and large, after he left the United States.
Would you say fled the United States?
I think that's partly right. I mean, he moved his entire family to the United Arab Emirates. I don't think it's necessarily so that he was afraid of U.S. justice. I think that he was the U.S. government and Obama administration had soured on Erik Prince and Blackwater, and so he needed a new start. And he went to the Emirates and he found a benefactor there in Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed, who's the de facto leader of the United Arab Emirates. And he built himself a new program, a new job, a new form of income, which was 2 secret armies, one for the Emirates and the Emiratis, and one in Somalia. And I think as he's come back with the Trump administration, it was important to understand what he had been doing for the last 10 years and really to understand as he tries to pitch in Afghanistan, new reports that he's trying to sell a program in Venezuela and a mercenary army there, to understand who he really is, both as a businessman, as a strategic thinker, and more than anything else, I think sort of where he is politically, which is what people don't realize is really on the dirty trick side of things. And that was something that was surprising as I went through the reporting, was that he took his skills that he had picked up and worked and sold around the world and ended up sort of coming around and using them domestically and finding domestic partners for them.
For people who aren't familiar with Erik Prince, go back to Blackwater and what it did, what it was known for, among other things, Nisour Square. Sure.
Blackwater was a private military consulting group or company that provided armed guards, security, operatives for the U.S. military, for the State Department, and for the CIA in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Blackwater, as a name, became known and understood around the world, or infamous for American hubris, because they had a series of incidents, massacres, mismanagement, and violence that occurred in Afghanistan, but most memorably and unfortunately in Iraq. And by the end of the Obama administration, the Bush administration rather, Prince was forced to change the name because it had become so toxic after Nisour Square, and sell.
Nisour Square was the killing of 17 Iraqi civilians with this band of Blackwater guards in a square in Baghdad where they opened fire.
Right. And he became too toxic and Blackwater became too toxic, so they changed the name, and then he was forced to sell. And once the Obama administration comes in, they make it very clear that Blackwater was not welcome in the government contracting world, and so he had to find a new gig.
So jump forward to that meeting in the Seychelles.
So in January of 2017, a week before the inauguration of Donald Trump, Erik Prince gets on a plane and goes to the Seychelles, where he is attending the private strategy session of Mohammed bin Zayed. And Erik Prince had previously essentially been part of bin Zayed's, MBZ as he's referred to, his royal court as an advisor on counterterrorism and fighting Islamic militantism and militants in the Middle East and Northern Africa, East Africa. And he's there, we now know, and certainly from reporting and then the Mueller report, he's there to meet with a top Russian banker who's the emissary for Putin. And MBZ is trying to put together a sort of new world order with an new incoming U.S. administration to try to solve Syria, to try to figure out what to do in Yemen, and try to, from their standpoint, from the Gulf Arab standpoint, beat back Iran. And all of those things are things that Erik Prince has been obsessed with for 20 plus years. And so he has this meeting with MBZ, but then he also has a secondary meeting with this Russian banker who is the back channel to Putin. And what we get out of it for the next couple of 18 months is Erik Prince's insistence that the meeting was by chance, that he had run into this Russian at the bar and had a beer, and it was just two guys who were talking commodities prices. And what my story did was to look at it, and in fact that's actually where the story began for me in the reporting, was I had done a lot of reporting on Erik's business efforts his effort in a private equity fund in Africa. And in that reporting, what I discovered was that he had mostly just lost his own money. He had poured anywhere from $35 to $50 million in his own money and lost almost all of it. And so it seemed odd to me that he was saying to Congress, the Emiratis said, hey, you're in the commodities business, and this Russian banker who manages an $8 billion sovereign wealth fund is also in the commodities business. You have a lot to talk about. And what struck me was that they had nothing to talk about. One was a guy who had managed to lose his own money at a small amount relative to world finance, and another is one of the biggest sovereign wealth bankers in the world. So unless they're passing messages between two entities, they really had nothing to talk about. And that sort of began my journey through Erik Prince's last 10 years as a businessman.
And that was Kirill Dmitriev, who was the chief, a very close associate as well to President Putin.
That's right.
So talk about, President Erik Prince was with Donald Trump the night he was elected, very close to him, again, the brother of Betsy DeVos. Talk about his plan to privatize the war in Afghanistan.
Sure. With Trump's election, Prince was back in the game, and he had been out for 8 years for the entire Obama administration, and the Trump administration, which was largely backed by the Mercer family during the campaign, also close to the Prince family, Bannon, Breitbart, all people that Erik Prince was close to. Erik Prince saw an opportunity here to get back into government contracting, and his plan was to pull U.S. troops out of Afghanistan in their entirety and replace them with something like what he called the East India Corporation. That's what he compared it to, and that the U.S. should have a viceroy, and that someone like Erik Prince should be the viceroy, and put together a private military that would do work with the Afghan army. And that proposal, which he plugged in op-eds and television, was landed very poorly inside the national security establishment in the U.S. It also landed very poorly in Afghanistan, where Afghan President Ashraf Ghani has said under no circumstances will Erik Prince or a private military, foreign military, be allowed to operate in Afghanistan.
You also have this latest report from Reuters. Over the last several months, Prince has sought investment and political support for an operation involving Venezuela from influential Trump supporters and wealthy Venezuelan exiles. In private meetings in the U.S. and Europe, Prince sketched out a plan to field up to 5,000 soldiers for hire on behalf of Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido, according to two sources with direct knowledge of Prince's pitch.
You know, what makes Erik Prince so unique is that there are very few Americans who have the wealth and the political power and his experience, so that someone who has really never worked for the government or been part of government is taken so seriously whenever there is or wherever there is a conflict, a hotspot around the world. Erik Prince travels the world almost weekly, going to capitals, meeting with countries' leaders, selling a mercenary concept, a paramilitary arm. And what he tries to do is own every piece of a supply chain for conflict. And so it was no surprise, it was shocking, but it's no surprise that he had a plan for Venezuela. One hopes, and part of the reason why I worked on this story for so long, was one hopes that by understanding how incompetent he is as a businessman and as a manager for these programs, that no one would trust him to give him that kind of responsibility or the money to pay for something like this.
You broke news with this part of the piece. During the 2016 election, he became involved with James O'Keefe and Project Veritas, a group of conservative provocateurs who specialize in using hidden camera footage and secret recordings.
Yeah, and this was, again, what I was saying about him coming back sort of domestically was as he failed abroad, he started to look at politics and come back home. And what he did was he found like-minded groups. He had been pitched years before to be an investor in the Israeli intelligence company called Black Cube, which got notoriety during the Me Too movement, the hashtag Me Too movement with the Harvey Weinstein investigations, and they are former Israeli intelligence operatives who act and pose as people, as journalists, to try to gather information, usually for dirt. And it's,
Weinstein hired them to try to...
Right. Weinstein's lawyer hired them to try to figure out what journalists who were digging into the story knew and to try to see if they could stop the stories. And so Erik Prince has merged, essentially, with Project Veritas and James O'Keefe and provided them with training from former spies to teach them surveillance, elicitation, weapons training. He brought them out after the election. He brought them out to his family ranch in Wyoming and gave them weapons training. And what he has now is a team of dedicated people who have some training in being undercover. And the question is to what end?
Project Veritas goes after groups like Planned Parenthood.
Right, but I actually think that what we're going to see, and in fact we have some indication already, that Erik Prince is using Project Veritas to target his political enemies or political enemies of the Trump administration or his political associates. And so that becomes the question, is what is he doing with them? How are they going to be used? What are they capable of? And as he has been sort of denied the ability to sell, let's say, tanks or planes, he's now trying to sell undercover intelligence operatives, but not for a covert war, for American politics. And that's what makes him particularly dangerous.
We're going to do part 2 of this discussion and post online at democracynow.org. Matthew Cole, investigative journalist for The Intercept, will link to his piece, The Complete Mercenary, How Erik Prince Used the Rise of Trump to Make an Improbable Comeback. And that does it for our broadcast. Happy birthday, Dennis Moynihan. Democracy Now! Has a job opening for a full-time paid digital social media fellowship. Go to democracynow.org for details. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.
Wow, so there's a lot of good information there. Wow, a lot of good information. So, like I said, there's so much just about this guy. And so we showed CNN, Fox News, and Democracy Now! So kind of across the spectrum about, what's going on with like his ties to Russia. Basically just a gun for hire for anybody, but kind of being a backdoor channel and kind of operative for Trump. And he said in his own words in one of those videos that trying to make the argument that Russia and the United States should join forces to beat what they consider fascism of Islam or radical Islam, right? So he's even saying it in his own words. That's the point. That's the goal, right? But his goal is to hopefully be the guy who's gonna, make windfall profits off the conflicts with his private mercenary armies, right? So very interesting. So this is where Steve Bannon kind of comes into the mix. So let me close this one. We don't need this one anymore. So when I type in Steve Bannon wants private contractors to set strategy in Afghanistan. All right, so this is by Slate, by Osita Inwanivu, published July 11, 2017, 10:15 a.m. by Slate. So here we go. So on Monday, the New York Times reported that the Trump administration has called upon two prominent figures in private military contracting to come up with alternatives to sending more troops to Afghanistan, as the Pentagon has planned to do. From the Times, Erik Prince, a founder of the private security firm Blackwater Worldwide, and Stephen A. Feinberg, a billionaire financier who owns the giant military contractor DynCorp International, have developed a proposal to rely on contractors instead of U.S. troops, American troops in Afghanistan, at the behest of Stephen K. Bannon, Mr. Trump's chief strategist, and Jared Kushner, his senior advisor and son-in-law, according to people briefed on the conversations. So they're trying to privatize the military, right? So that's one of the goals of all these Heritage Foundation, conservative type people. They're trying to always privatize things, right? They're trying to take it out of the public domain where there's actual government accountability and put it in the hands of private interests who have no accountability, but can also, even though they claim they're going to do it at cheaper prices, have the ability to upcharge and then make taxpayers foot the bill for the contract. So it's a racket. They're looting. Is war profiteering at its worst? Is even worse than it's crazy. So on Saturday morning, Mr. Bannon sought out Defense Secretary Jim Mattis at the Pentagon to try to get a hearing for their ideas. An American official said Mr. Mattis listened politely but declined to include the outside strategies in a review of Afghanistan policy that he is leading along with the National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster's. So isn't that so interesting, right? So you have what's his nickname? Mad Dog Mattis. So he was like a Marine and everything like that, right? So Jim Mattis. Actually, let me do something here real quick. Just do something here. Just so we have a visual, just in case if people forgot. That's that Michael Pack guy previously. But anyways, so this is Mattis. So James Norman Jim Mattis is an American military veteran who served as the 26th United States Secretary of Defense from 2017 to 2019. A retired Marine Corps 4-star general, he commanded forces in the Persian Gulf, the war in Afghanistan, and the Iraq War. So Mattis was commissioned in the United, and so he was. We don't have to go into all his backgrounds, but he has some pretty good accomplishments. So let me see here. From 2007 to 2010, he commanded United States Joint Forces Command, and concurrently served as NATO's Supreme Allied Commander transformation. He was commander of the United States Central Command, other words CENTCOM, so they're kind of responsible for the Middle East, so like the hottest region on Earth, from 2010 to 2013, with Admiral Bob Harward serving as his deputy commander. So very interesting, right? So he's a very accomplished guy. So this guy ain't messing around, you know. And a lot of people were happy that Trump had actually nominated him. But let me see here. So very interesting. So there's that. So let's go back to this article. So it's interesting that, you know, Prince, Bannon, this other guy, Feinberg, and Jared Kushner were trying to sell this kind of like privatized plan to Defense Secretary Mad Dog Mattis at the Pentagon, but Mattis was like, sorry guys, you guys kind of have to get out of here. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, and that's the thing about when we get into the biography of Erik Prince is that like he's kind of undeserving, really. I think that just because he's rich and like I'm not gonna lie, I think he did special forces, but I'm not sure for how long. Like he wasn't a career guy, you know what I'm saying? And like you know, so I think so for like a hardened veteran like Mattis, he's kind of like get out of my face type thing. Like I think that he really kind of respects protocol in order in the establishment in the system and taking orders from his boss type thing rather than just like trying to get involved in these kind of Iran Contra like clandestine missions and stuff like that. So they declined their proposal basically. So the move follows last month's news that the Pentagon is planning to send as many as 4,000 additional troops to Afghanistan. So the Times report notes that Prince wrote a May op-ed in the Wall Street Journal calling for private military contractors to take on the functions of American troops. This kind of strategy could be a windfall for companies, in other words, major profits for companies like Feinberg's DynCorp, which the Times says has received $2.5 billion from the State Department for his work in Afghanistan already. So there's a big industry to keep these things going. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I'm saying. The irony. This is me talking. The irony of like for example, with the war in Ukraine right now, how like Republicans are trying to like use reverse psychology on like Democrats or liberals or leftists or whatever. Like, oh, the left used to be all about peace, but now they're all about war or whatever. It's like, what are y'all talking about? Like, you're always about war. You're always about it. So just because, so now that the left has in what they consider to be some sort of moral cause that has that involves war for their protection of the United States, they're wrong or something. Like, in other words, I don't. It's all the nonsense back and forth siblings fighting in the back seat between the left and the right. So that kind of strategy could be a windfall, yada yada. So the Times also says that Feinberg would like to see the CIA lead the American effort in Afghanistan with paramilitary units carrying out operations on the ground. This sounds like, so basically, so if you know anything about Vietnam or like CIA type kind of quasi conspiracy, even though it's not a conspiracy, it's real stuff. You know about Phoenix Program, right? Phoenix Program, I think, was set up by CIA Director William Colby to essentially have these like PRUs, provincial reconnaissance units. Essentially, like you had U.S. Special Forces and I forgot what their name is, like Max SOG or something. You had these like kind of badass Green Berets basically having like hit groups in like serial killer squads, basically going around essentially targeting people who they suspected of being like sympathetic to the North Vietnamese army and the Viet Cong, who are the insurgent forces living in South Vietnam on behest of the Northern Vietnamese army. So it was very interesting. Is that like that's what I'm saying? Like this right wing thing, mindset. It goes way back in our country, and it seems that like Erik Prince probably grew up with the stories of like what was going on in Vietnam and what was going on in Iran Contra in Nicaragua with the Contras. But he was too young. He was too young for all that. But now he's an adult. He wants in too. He wants the adventure, right? He wants to be like General John K. Singlaub, who we'll go into more detail later. And John K. Singlaub is a major figure in a lot of kind of like CIA, Black Ops lore type stuff. But based on this article, they essentially want to privatize the military, and they also want the CIA, who answers directly to the president, but also, even though they have to answer to Congress, they also are kind of known for kind of doing their own thing, essentially. They want them basically managing a war. They were trying to do what Ronald Reagan couldn't do because of the Boland Amendment in regards to the Nicaraguan a conflict between the Sandinistas and the Contras, because Ronald Reagan wanted to fund a conflict in Nicaragua, but because of the abuses of the Contras and also just general malaise after the Vietnam War era of the 70s and 60s, is that Congress basically said you can't sell weapons to Nicaragua. So this is when Ronald Reagan, with Oliver North, who also is eerily similar to Erik Prince, another person I think Erik Prince looks up to. Oliver North, with his famous, photo of him in Congress, with his hand giving the oath and everything. Um, Oliver North was charged with essentially funneling money to make all of this happen. And as a quick kind of recap of Iran Contra, even though it's kind of confusing, was that in like the 70s and the 80s, there were a lot of kidnappings of U.S. People in the Middle East, just because of America's general stance with Israel, a lot of different things, just a lot of different things. So a lot of people were getting, kidnapped. Uh, Also, because of America's support for Israel, when Israel invaded Lebanon, because a lot of Palestinians that were displaced by Israel moved to Lebanon and became insurgents against Israel. Because the United States supported Israel, there were terror attacks against like U.S. embassies, Marine barracks, and stuff like that, ships, etc. So there were a lot of hostages, right, in this kind of era. Also, there were a lot of hostages in Iran because when Ayatollah Khomeini, I believe, took over power there, that's where like the movie Argo comes into play. If you've ever seen that, when they took over, they essentially held a bunch of captives of the U.S. embassy there. So this was a big thing, and a lot of scholars say that the Iran hostage situation cost Jimmy Carter the election, even though Jimmy Carter actually tried to do a rescue mission, a special ops rescue mission for the refugees, but it actually ended in disaster when I believe like a helicopter crashed or something, right? But regardless, this whole era of the 70s, 80s was defined by American hostages held by kind of radical Islamic forces and everything. So Ronald Reagan wanted to get those people out. But the weird thing was they concocted an idea to sell missiles to Iran in exchange for hostages. And with the profits from those sales, Oliver North would skim some off the top, launder it through Swiss and clandestine banks, and then funnel the difference into the Nicaraguan war to support the Contras. So outside the purview of Congress and outside the purview of the Boland Amendment restrictions on arms sales to Nicaragua. So very fascinating stuff. And so this is the era that Erik Prince wants to go back to. So let me see here. And actually, let me do something real quick for you, just as a recap. We go here, go to here. Go to, where are we at? Thought we had, here we go. So I like to make these notes and schematics and stuff like that just to kind of keep notes. So see what we're working with here real quick. All right, so here we go. So this is like a schematic that I did just to kind of explain Iran Contra. So this could be probably a video in and of itself, but it was wild, man. So we had like Iran Contra, so Ronald Reagan through his National Security Council of Bud McFarlane, Caspar Weinberger, Donald Regan, and George Shultz, alongside CIA Director William Casey. So, in other words, selling arms to Iran and using proceeds to fund Contra wars, but hoping to free jihadi held hostages. So it was this, and Oliver North was kind of like the project manager for making that happen. So they were kind of like funneling, they were selling Tau missiles to Iran with the help of CIA members like Richard Secord and like the successor clandestine airline agencies like Air America, Southern Air Transit, things of that nature, flying the arms to Iran and then pocketing the proceeds from the sales into Swiss bank accounts, which would then be funneled to the Contras, in other words, the FDN, the Nicaraguan Democratic Front, and then so funneling that money to buy weapons. The weapons would be sent to something called John Hole Farm in I think nearby Costa Rica. So basically, sell arms to Iran with the help of the CIA, pocket the money in Swiss bank accounts and everything like that. Takes the proceeds or some of the proceeds to buy weapons. Those weapons would be flown into John Hole Farm. So in nearby, I think Costa Rica, or Honduras, I think it's Costa Rica, one of the countries, just so you could say, if caught, that you weren't directly giving money, importing them into Nicaragua. Then from the John Hole Farm, it would make it to the Contra right-wing death squads who were going at war with the Sandinistas, and the Contras were receiving clandestine training from one of the founders of the CIA and founders of U.S. Army Special Forces, John K. Singlaub, who was later actually discharged from service and told to resign his commission by Jimmy Carter because of how he thought Jimmy Carter was handling the Middle Eastern situation. John K. Singlaub ends up finding his own private intelligence network, Western Goals. So it seems like Erik Prince is trying to model what was kind of going on during the Iran Contra scandal. And as a lot of people know in CIA lore, that the Iran Contra situation also links to Barry Seal, the famous drug trafficker, Arkansas, but it also links to Oscar Danilo Blandón, who was the cocaine distributor for Freeway Ricky Ross, who later distribute cocaine later made into crack to the Bloods and the Crips, helping to blow up the crack epidemic of the 1980s. So this is why a lot of people allege that the CIA was essentially helping to poison America with drugs in order to help make additional proceeds to help the Contras fight their war against the Sandinistas. So very fascinating history there. So with that being said, let's get back to the article, right? Okay, so let's rehash that sentence, right? So the Times also says that Feinberg would like to see the CIA lead the American effort in Afghanistan with paramilitary units carrying out operations on the ground. The strategy has been called the Laos plan. Oh my goodness gracious. The strategy has been called the Laos option because Laos, after America's shadowy involvement in Laos during the war in neighboring Vietnam. The Times, Mark Landler, Eric Schmidt, and Michael R. Gordon write CIA contractors train Laotian soldiers to fight communist insurgents and their North Vietnamese allies until 1975, leaving the country under communist control and with a deadly legacy of unexploded bombs. Really crazy stuff. Because to go back into history a little bit, and so just give wow. So think about this, right? Let's recap this. Erik Prince, Jared Kushner, this Feinberg guy of DynCorp, and Steve Bannon go knock on, theoretically, as an analogy, they go knock on General Mad Dog Jim Mattis's door, who's like, hey, here's our idea about how we can win in Afghanistan. They basically copy and paste everything that happened in the secret shadow war in the Golden Triangle of the Vietnam era, sprinkle in some Iran Contra stuff, which is also another debacle and disaster, and then they say, hey, this is our idea. And then Mad Dog Mattis basically says, please get out of my office. So let me see here, right? This is crazy because also how I was talking about in Iran Contra, the whole like drug smuggling, cocaine stuff, kind of how CIA was kind of involved, potentially, wink, wink, allegedly, right? The same thing was happening in the Vietnam, and Laos and Thailand in the Golden Triangle because, for example, CIA contractors train Laotian soldiers. Those Laotian soldiers were of the ethnic group called the Hmong people, and also another ethnic group I forget. And also, they actually have a very strong community actually in places like Minnesota, of all places, and I think a little bit of Southern California because they were relocated there with the help of the U.S. State Department for their loyalty during this conflict. But they were heroin growers. They would actually grow opium and heroin and all that type of stuff. So same thing. A lot of that heroin, wink, wink, made it out of the Golden Triangle. It would be essentially sold to Westerners who were shooting up, and the money profits would essentially be black untraceable money to help fund clandestine missions to quote unquote fight the communists across the globe. But the sad thing is that when we left Laos, we left a lot of people there to suffer under that totalitarian regime, but also we left a lot of U.S. Air Force unexploded bombs because when the U.S. Air Force would fly over Vietnam to do bombing missions, they would kind of secretly venture off into Laos because we knew that the Viet Cong in the Northern Vietnamese Army were using like the Ho Chi Minh Trail, etc. We would drop bombs there, but a lot of those bombs didn't explode. So then you have these little kids going around playing or whatever. They step on a bomb and it just blows up and like kills a bunch of people. So let's get back to the article. So this is not the first mention of Feinberg and Prince's role in Trump's circle. Early in the administration, it was reported that Feinberg had been asked by Trump to conduct a review of America's intelligence community. It's trying to privatize American intelligence, wink, wink, just like John K. Singlop tried to do with Western goals. So, and in April, it was reported that Prince had been involved in an effort by the UAE to set up back channels between the Russian government and Trump just before the inauguration. Prince is the brother of Trump's education secretary, Betsy DeVos. He is perhaps most famous, though, for a 2017 incident in which Blackwater contractors in Iraq killed 17 Iraqi civilians in Baghdad's Nizor Square while he was heading the company, right? So exactly, you know, so George Bush, Dick Cheney, they gave the privatized idea a chance and everything like that. They were already getting scrutiny because of, the Halliburton no bid contract controversy legend that you kind of hear about when you hear about the Afghanistan, Iraq wars and all that, right? So then you have this rich kid who wants to be a mercenary, just like, probably his idols, John K. Singlov, Oliver North, etc. He fails at it, makes a major international incident, uh, definitely kind of hurts the quote unquote hearts and mind campaigns of the coin strategy. So coin, the counterinsurgency sort of doctrine that I believe was highly touted by people like General David Petraeus and the other guy during the time frame. I forgot his name. It's like Mick something. Um, so so he created this big international incident, and so but then he disappears for a while, comes back. Oh, Trump, man, Trump is gonna have my back. He's gonna like my ideas. Bannon has a direct tie and all this type of stuff. They go knock on Mad Dog Mattis's door, and then all of a sudden, sorry, like we can't do this right now, type of thing, right? So let me go here. And it also makes you, and also, for example, right? So when Biden, for example, pulls out of Afghanistan, there was a lot of controversy about how we moved out and everything like that. However, that's a whole nother story and situation. But the thing is that you can almost make the argument that a lot of the people making a fuss that Biden left Afghanistan poorly are people like the Erik Princes and the Feinberg in his lobby or whatever, because they never wanted to leave, because they wanted this idea to come to fruition or whatever. So they're largely behind. I wouldn't be surprised the talking points that you hear at like the Republican National Convention, where people like goofballs like Donald Trump Jr. or whatever up on stage talking about Biden left Afghanistan horribly or whatever. But it's just like we had to get out anyway. So it's like we got out of Afghanistan, that was bad or something like that. But then all of a sudden it's like we need to go to war with Iran or something, or we need to go to war with China. It's kind of picking or choosing what like angers you. Um, so that was interesting, right? So this is like Steve Bannon. This is actually a good article. I actually like this one here. So that's so crazy, right? So and also before I get off this, because it's so fascinating, the nerdy history and how it all intersects from the Vietnam era, the CIA, So let's go here. So this is Phoenix program. So the Phoenix program was designed and initially coordinated by the CIA during the Vietnam, involving American, South Vietnamese militaries and a small amount of special forces operatives from the Australian Army training team. So in 1970, CIA responsibility was phased out, and the program was put under the authority of the Civil Operations Revolutionary Development Support Corps. So the program, which lasted from 1967 to 1972, was designed to identify and destroy the VC via infiltration, assassination, torture, capture, counterterrorism, and interrogation. The CIA described it as a set of programs that sought to attack and destroy the political infrastructure of the Viet Cong. The Phoenix program was premised on the idea that North Vietnamese infiltration had required local support within non-combat civilian populations, which were referred to as the VC infrastructure and political branch that purportedly coordinated the insurgency. So in other words, it's using terrorism to basically take out the insurgency. So peep this, right? Throughout the program, Phoenix neutralized, in other words, killed 81,740 people suspected of VC membership, of whom 369,000 were killed. Wow. So 81,000 people were neutralized, but then they're saying 26,000 were killed, and the results and the rest surrendered or were captured. Of those killed, 87% were attributed to conventional military operations by South Vietnamese and American forces, while the remaining 13 were attributed to Phoenix program operatives. Some hardcore stuff, right? And this is, interestingly, if you ever watched the movie Lethal Weapon, the character Riggs, played by who's the guy who was flipping out on his wife and talking about the Jews, all that. Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson's character Riggs was a part of the Phoenix program. That's why he's so crazy in the movie, right? So there's that. So this is an interesting little backstory. What else we got here? So wow. Let me go here real quick. So now let's skip over to some of the Libya stuff. So this is fascinating, and this actually, I've connected this to actually the NXVIM type stuff, interestingly enough. All right, so let me click out of this one. So let's talk about this. Okay, so we'll talk about Libya. So we talked about the Seychelles stuff. We talked about how they want to privatize. They tried to privatize the war in Afghanistan. We kind of talked about some back history of Iran Contra, stuff like that, right? So now we're going to skip over to Erik Prince's involvement in Libya. So let's think back to Libya, right? So Libya, they used to be ran by was it Muammar Gaddafi, right? Gaddafi, controversial figure, allegedly kind of funded a lot of like terrorism against the United States, or just the West or whatnot, from their perspective, because they felt that the United States and others were committing terrorism against them. I know I'm an American, I'm a proud American and everything like that. I'm sure Gaddafi was not a good person. I don't know, but just saying, how in war, you know, a person who commits terrorism could be considered a freedom fighter to another, and that's where like the blurriness kind of happens, right? Even though we have to choose sides, and I'm an American, so I choose the American side. But so Libya, right? So Libya, this is when the Benghazi situation happened, right? And actually, let me do something here real quick to have some background information. Okay, so we're talking about Erik Prince in Libya, right? So in order to understand that, we have to understand what happened in Benghazi, right? So remember when Hillary Clinton was running, supposedly she had like emails that weren't, properly marked or whatever like that, and Republicans tried to pounce on that to hurt her chances of winning the presidency, right? So they put her in front of Congress, all this type of stuff to testify about what was going on in Benghazi, right? So Benghazi, right? And they used that as political ammunition to kind of kneecap Hillary so she wouldn't win, right? So very interesting situation. So it happened in 2012. Wow, forever ago. So let me see here. So what happened? So the 2012 Benghazi attack was a coordinated attack against two U.S. government facilities in Benghazi, Libya, by members of the Islamic militant group Ashnar al-Sharia on September 11, 2011, so the anniversary of September 11, members of the Ansar al-Sharia attacked the American diplomatic compound in Benghazi, resulting in the deaths of United States Ambassador to Libya, J. Christopher Stevens, and U.S. Foreign Service Information Management Officer Sean Smith. So around 4 a.m. on September 12th, the group launched a mortar attack against a CIA annex approximately 1 mile away, killing two CIA contractors, Tyrone S. Woods and Glenn Doherty, and wounding 10 others. Initial analysis by the CIA, repeated by top government officials, indicated that the attack spontaneously arose from a protest. Subsequent investigation showed that the attack was premeditated, although rioters and looters not originally part of the group may have joined in after the attack began. So these are some photos of what happened. So from top to bottom, so president, vice president updated on the situation. So that's Biden and Obama being briefed about what's happening in 2012. So yep, let me see here, Hillary Clinton. So also Hillary Clinton, what she has to testify in front of the Foreign Relations Committee, etc. So there is no evidence that Al Qaeda or any other international terrorist group organized or any other international terrorist organization participated in the Benghazi attack. The United States immediately increased security worldwide at diplomatic and military facilities and began investigating the Benghazi attack. The Libyan government condemned the attacks and took steps to disband the militias. 30,000 Libyans marched through Benghazi condemning Ashnar al-Sharia, which had been formed during the 2011 civil war to topple Muammar Gaddafi, right? So very interesting. So in other words, we had some sort of we had the CIA facility there, right? Maybe it was a safe house, just who knows what's going on, Coordination Center or something. It got tipped off, and these Islamic jihadis attacked it, right? And it became a big controversy. And Republicans kind of turned it on like it was all Hillary's fault and stuff like that. So let me see here. So despite persistent accusations against President Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Susan Rice, 10 investigations, 6 by Republican-controlled congressional committees, so did not find that they or any other high-ranking Obama administration officials had acted improperly, right? So think about that. So Republicans used it as a kind of a witch hunt to figure out what's going on. They didn't find anything, but all of that kind of, a lot of people would suspect actually kind of hurt Hillary Clinton when she went up against Trump because all he did was talk about Benghazi, etc. So 4 career State Department officials were criticized for denying requests for additional security at the facility prior to the attack. Eric J. Boswell, the Assistant Secretary of State for Diplomatic Security, resigned under pressure, while 3 others were suspended. In her role as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton subsequently took responsibility for the security lapses. So this is interesting. So on August 6, 2013, it was reported that the United States had filed criminal charges against several individuals alleged to have been involved in the attacks, including militia leader Ahmed Abu Khattala. Khattala had been described by both Libyan and United States officials as the Benghazi leader of Ansar al-Sharia. The United States Department of State designated Ansar al-Sharia as a terrorist organization in January 2024. Khattala was captured by Libya by the U.S. Army Special Operation Forces, who were acting in coordination with the FBI in June 2014. Another suspect, Mustafa al-Imam, was captured in October 2017. So this Ahmed Abdul Khattala guy is actually very interesting, because if I actually go to another one of my little notes here, actually I think I already have it pulled up. No, I do not. Oh, nope, yes I do. Right here. So let me pull this one up here. This actually connects to the NXVIM stuff I was talking about, where I can go into more detail over there, right? So we have Libya, Gaddafi, Benghazi, CIA, Ahmed Abdul Khattala, Erik Prince, Johnson Co., Frontier Services Group, Project Opus. That's why I'm bringing this up, because we're about to get into talk about this stuff here soon and everything. And Libya has always been kind of a hotbed for CIA activity. For example, the infamous case of Edwin Wilson, who was a CIA member who was accused of selling C4 actually to the Gaddafi administration. Libya is also known for human and drug trafficking, because it's kind of the corridor that connects kind of like the Mediterranean to kind of like the deeper parts of Africa. So it's like the trans-African kind of corridor. So when Gaddafi fell, it also kind of helped cause it helped to push the refugee crisis even worse. So Europe was already having the refugee crisis because of Syria, right? Because of the Assad regime, what was going on in there, ISIS, things of that nature, right? Americans were bombing Syria, Russia was bombing Syria, Israel was bombing Syria, the Assad government was fighting all different sides. It was a complete mess. So you had a lot of refugees from there, but also you had a lot of refugees from Libya. So this is where you get a lot of like the people on the boats kind of washing up on the shores of Italy and Corsica and France and all these type of things, right? Making the dangerous journey. That didn't used to be the case, because interestingly, Gaddafi as the dictator kind of kept that country in control. So when actually the United States, NATO, Russia, all these different countries interfered and helped topple these governments, interestingly, it helped create the refugee crisis, which therefore compounded the growing nationalism in Europe, which in and of itself was compounded by the global financial crisis, in which countries like Italy, Spain, Ireland, also the United States with the housing stuff, it basically imploded the global economy. So you had all these European countries going through severe austerity, where they were making all these cuts and everything. A lot of people were laid off and unemployment rose. That's the prime situation for populism to arise. Once that populism arose, you started having more of a nativist populism. So then when you add that with refugees from wars, you start getting racism and xenophobia. Therefore, fast forward to 2024, this is why you had Marine Le Pen in France almost beating the coalition in France with Macron. This is why you have the AfD in Germany, who are basically a Nazi party, gaining popularity. This is why you have what's her name, Maloney in Italy, who won with the help of I think like the Northern Lombard League or something like that, something akin to that, winning power. This is why you have Golden Dawn in Greece. So it's like it's a part of the plan, right? So it's like creating these Muslim immigrants who have nowhere else to go. They go to Europe. The Europeans, are afraid of them because they have a different religion and stuff like that. And there's all the historic sort of, aspects of the Crusades, Charles Martel and the Battle of Tours, in which, so for example, there's a white supremacist organization called the Charles Martel Society. So like this notion of Europe under threat from the old antiquated term of the Saracens or the Moors or the Muslims, right? That is kind of a part of like European lore. So by NATO, the United States, Russia, Israel, Saudi Arabia, even helping to create these refugees, they actually feed into neoliberal, neoconservative corporate power by getting right-wing fascist leaders into positions of power, who therefore privatize the government and hand it over to the people, like that Feinberg guy of Dying Corp. It's all a part of a system and an agenda, and Donald Trump is kind of just our American version of that. That's why I said at the beginning of the video, a global fascist conspiracy. But anyways, that Ahmed Abdul Khattala thing, right? That connects to a person named Basit Tet. Basit Tet, this is wild stuff here. I should probably just talk about it. Why not, right? So Basit Tet is a Libyan Swiss businessman, kind of mover pusher guy, right? He actually, after Gaddafi was overthrown, led essentially the kind of like transitional council, right? To essentially bring the insurgent forces who toppled Gaddafi with the pre-existing kind of leftover Gaddafi government together to kind of create like a transitional government, right? In the wake of Gaddafi's violent death. I think he was like beat to death in the streets, right? Basit Tet, interestingly, was working with Joel Lieberman as his lobbyist, right? Joel Lieberman, even though he kind of spent his career as like an independent Democrat or whatever, actually switched over to his support to Trump. And Donald Trump, interestingly, has shortlisted Joel Lieberman to be the director of the FBI. Just going to show to all the MAGA supporters out there who thinks that Donald Trump was trying to drain the swamp or false or just they're just misled. So, anyways, Basit Tet, who had some connection somehow to the people, or maybe even Ahmed Abdul Khattala himself. Basit Tet, his wife is Sarah Bronfman. Sarah Bronfman and her sister Claire Bronfman were involved in the NXIVM sex cult with Keith Raniere. The NXIVM cult, even though he denies it, had some connections to Roger Stone, therefore another link to Donald Trump. They tried to get Roger Stone to be some sort of consultant, but Roger Stone kind of denies those allegations. NXIVM, right? Let's go back here. The Basit Tet, remember, the husband of Sarah Bronfman. I know I'm going really fast. Basit Tet, he was actually working with another consultant named Joe Hagan. Joe Hagan was of a company called Command Consulting Group, and he had connections to Trump and was hoping that Trump would make him the director of the CIA. Basit Tet also had connections, interestingly, to Riccardo Martinelli, who I believe is the disgraced president of Panama. And Riccardo Martinelli, interestingly, in his own country, was sentenced to 10 years for laundering. So think about that. What did I say about Libya? Libya is known for human and drug trafficking. So we have a Swiss banker, the guy, with Libyan connections, overseeing the transitional government, trying to position himself actually as being like the prime minister or the president of Libya, and he was trying to lobby American support for that, right? that country's known for drugs and smuggling, right? Swiss bank accounts like Deutsche Bank, UBS, those type of banks, right? They're infamous for drug money. And he also has ties to a country, Panama, through Ricardo Martinelli, also infamously known for drug smuggling, such as with the expose, the Panama, and the Paradise Papers. So that's why I connected this stuff here, right? So then we get back to Erik Prince, Johnson Co., yada, yada, yada. It goes on and on and on. So let me do something here, right? So we talked about that. Okay, so Libya was a nightmare, right? Back on track. Libya was a kind of chaotic place and everything, right? And Erik Prince wanted some of the action, So let's read this article here by Al Jazeera. Trump ally, let me blow it up for you. Here we go. All right, so Trump ally Erik Prince violated Libya arms embargoes, UN report. A confidential report finds Prince supplied renegade Libyan General Khalifa Haftar with weapons and foreign mercenaries. Prince is the former head of the private military contractor Blackwater. So private security contractor Erik Prince, a close ally to former U.S. President Donald Trump, because this was already published in 2021, so after he had lost, violated a United Nations arms embargo on Libya, UN investigators have found in a report detailed by the U.S. media. The confidential report to the Security Council obtained by the New York Times and Washington Post and partially seen by Al Jazeera said on Friday that Prince deployed a force of foreign mercenaries and weapons to renegade military commander Khalifa Haftar, who had fought to overthrow the UN-recognized Libyan government in 2019. Interesting. Ugh, wow. So, wow. So the 80 million operation included plans to form a hit squad to track and kill Libyan commanders opposed to Haftar, including some who were also European Union citizens. So this is the thing, right? So Gaddafi falls, UN steps in, you started trying to have this kind of reconciliation process because you have all these various factions vying for control. One of the warlords was this Haftar guy, and Erik Prince shacked up with this Haftar guy to be like, hey, I'll help you out. You rub my back, I rub your back type thing too. So it was an $80 million operation, included plans to form hit squads to track and kill Libyan commanders opposed to Haftar. That just makes you go to show that Erik Prince is a very dangerous person. If Erik Prince is so willing to just do this type of stuff, like we already talked about, Iran Contra in the death squads with the Contras. We already talked about the Provincial Reconnaissance Unit death squads of Operation Phoenix in Vietnam and Laos. So now he's trying to do it again with the clandestine hit squads in Libya. So Martin Schwartz, a lawyer for Prince, denied the accusations. Mr. Prince, who had no involvement in any alleged military operation in Libya in 2019 or at any other time, Schwartz said in a statement, he did not provide weapons, personnel, or military equipment to anyone in Libya. Prince, a former Navy SEAL and brother of Trump's Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, drew infamy as the head of the Blackwater private security firm, whose contractors were accused of killing unarmed Iraqi civilians in Baghdad in 2007. Four who were convicted were pardoned by Trump. Very interesting, right? So those people who did that square shooting that killed 17 Iraqi civilians were pardoned by Trump. So the accusation exposes Prince to possible UN sanctions, including a travel ban, the Times said. Prince did not cooperate with the UN inquiry, and his lawyer declined to comment to the New York Times. It added. So Al Jazeera's Christian Salumi, reporting to Washington, D.C., said the report's findings go deeper than just Prince's actions. Wow. We may have to read that one. We may have to just spend something on a day just reading that UN report if it's possible. So let's go over here to this article. This is by the Financial Times. All right, here we go. So Erik Prince accused of helping rebel Libyan general. Former head of Blackwater allegedly helped evade UN arms embargoes on North African oil producer. So UN inspectors said Erik Prince had met renegade General Khalifa Haftar soon after he launched a war in Libya in 2019 and made a proposal for a private military information. So this was written by Heba Saleh in Cairo, March 17, 2020. The editor of the Financial Times is Rula Khalaf. So let me see here. So Erik Prince, the U.S. private security contractor and former head of Blackwater Worldwide, tried to help a renegade general take control of Libya, at the very least, help evade a UN arms embargo on the country, UN inspectors have said. So Khalifa Haftar, a general from eastern Libya, launched a war in April 2019 to overthrow the UN-backed government in Tripoli. Wow, so Haftar, a general in eastern Libya, launched a war to overthrow the UN-backed government in Tripoli. His forces scuttled a UN process aimed at uniting the divided country and ending years of chaos since the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi, the former dictator, in 2011. Haftar's 14-month offensive, backed by the UAE, Egypt, and France, ultimately failed after the intervention of Turkey on the side of his opponents. An interim unity government tasked with preparing for elections was sworn in this week, raising hopes for the return of stability. So, days after the war began, Prince met Haftar in Cairo and made a proposal for a private military intervention, said UN inspectors. The alleged $80 million contract included assault aircraft, cyber capabilities, and the ability to intercept Turkish ships at sea. So I'm sure the Turks aren't very happy with that. So one component of the operation, dubbed Operation Opus, was to kidnap and terminate individuals regarded as high-value targets in Libya, said the experts. Prince violated a Security Council resolution on Libya, in that, at the very least, he assisted in the evasion of the provisions of the arms embargo in Libya, they said. So Matt Schwartz, a lawyer for Prince, said in a statement to the Financial Times on Tuesday that his client had absolutely no involvement in any alleged military operation in Libya in 2019. He did not provide weapons, personnel, or military equipment to anyone in Libya. He also denied there had been a meeting in Cairo with Haftar. So Prince was not in Egypt at any point in 2019, as travel records confirmed, and has never met or spoken to Haftar. This alleged meeting is fiction and never took place. So this is the second meeting of some high-profile thing that there's proof that happened, but Erik Prince is saying did not happen. So there's also the possibility that, Erik Prince, if he's willing to set up contracts to just murder people, he's also willing to just lie. Like, I'm kind of terrified. Hey, first and foremost, I am not suicidal. If anything happens to me, something's up, because I'm not sad or depressed or anything like that. So the report said 3 UAE companies were used for planning, management, and finance. Wow, look at that, right? So back to the UAE. So the report said that 3 UAE companies were used for the planning, management, and finance of the operation, and it named a South African citizen as the team leader on the ground. Always these South Africans and these ex-Rhodesians, bro. Always doing some clandestine stuff. Geez, bro. Like talk about Cold War. That's hardcore Cold War. When you start getting South Africans and Rhodesians up in the mix, stuff's about to pop off. But so the UN report said military aircraft for Project Opus were to be procured from Jordan, but officials in the kingdom canceled the sale after they suspected they would be used in an illegal operation. 6 former military helicopters were brought from South Africa, and 3 other aircraft were supplied by companies controlled by Prince, according to the UN report. So remember, in that, I think, Democracy Now! Video, they said that Erik Prince was living in the UAE. So he was living in the UAE. He probably sets up a bunch of companies there. He has contacts and everything like that. So he's creating his own kind of, clandestine network of movers and pushers, right? So UAE, and then so that makes sense there. So that connects back to what they were even saying in those previous videos. But Project Opus said the inspectors quickly ran into trouble because Khalifa Haftar was unimpressed with the replacement aircraft procured for the operation and made threats against the management team. Within days of their arrival in Libya, 20 mercenaries had to be evacuated in a hurry across the Sea of Malta aboard 2 inflatable boats originally bought for the operation. So interesting. So they do Project Opus. You can kind of think of Erik Prince as like the program manager, right? Trying to make all this, or I'm sorry, not the program manager, but he's like the CEO. There's a South African guy. Think of him as like the team lead program manager, right? Make sure you have the personnel, people, guns, weapons, stuff like that, right? First aid, all that. But they quickly ran into trouble because Khalifa Haftar was unimpressed with the replacement aircraft procured for the operation and made threats against the management team. So, talking about Lord of War stuff, man. So Erik Prince, he's trying to find all this stuff to sell to this Haftar guy because he's probably, because I'm sure Erik Prince sweet talked him and everything like that though too. We got the best of the best. Check out this gun. Check out that plane. We can do this. We can do that. And then it's like a movie. Khalifa Haftar is over here smoking a cigar, with a machete in his hand, with his like feet up on the desk or something, and like some dude like tied up, like crying in the corner, and then Khalifa Haftar is just like, okay, show me what you got. But then they show up and he's like, what in the hell is this? So within days of their arrival in Libya, 20 mercenaries had to be evacuated in a hurry across the sea to Malta aboard 2 inflatable boats originally bought for the operation. So I'm starting to notice a trend here with Trump type clandestine operations is that they're typically led by bumbling people, because this is very similar to what happened in Venezuela, when Venezuela and Maduro caught those American contractors trying to overthrow him. And the guy who led that botched operation was some security person involved with the Trump administration. So it's like anytime they try to go outside the purview of like the federal government and the U.S. military and the actual intelligence agencies whose jobs and budgets are to be like experts at this, they just mess it up. So Prince was once the darling of the U.S. government, which paid his company more than $2 billion to provide military support in Afghanistan, in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. But Blackwater became mired in controversy for the massacre of 14 unarmed Iraqi civilians by the company's operatives at a Baghdad traffic circle in 2007. So back to that incident. So his company made $2 billion from the Bush Cheney administration, right? I wondered, were those contracts audited and stuff like that? You know what I'm saying? Like, so 3 years after Prince sold the company, which has since changed its name twice. So Prince's lawyers charged that the UN panel of inspectors which produced the report refused to provide his clients with any information concerning the subject matter of the investigation and has quote unquote has failed to even put forward questions on topics about which the panel's reports apparently reaches false and slanderous conclusions. The report, however, said that Prince was contacted by email and letters sent by couriers to his residence, but no response was received. In other words, they tried to, they tried to serve him, and he's just been avoiding being served. It concluded his failure to cooperate with the panel means that the evidence supplied to this document is His failure to cooperate with the panel means that the evidence supplied to this document is submitted unexplained and unchallenged by Erik Prince. Additional reporting by Katrina Manson in Washington. Wow. Whew. Interesting. So he made $2 billion with Blackwater. He's known infamously for killing 17 Iraqi civilians in that Iraqi square in 2007. He's living in UAE. He set up 3 kind of front companies, and those front companies were actually doing the logistics and procurement for this Haftar warlord guy, right? So interesting. So I want to also say that if I go to my kind of photos here, so Haftar has ties to Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. So let me do something here real quick. So let me do something. El-Sisi. So this is Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. And it's interesting because he is actually trained by the U.S. military. I believe he's a veteran of like the U.S. Army War College or something. So he is an Egyptian politician and retired military officer. Because remember that meeting between Prince and Haftar happened in Cairo. So an Egyptian is an Egyptian politician and retired military officer who has been serving as the 6th and concurrent president of Egypt since 2014, before retiring as a general in the Egyptian military in 2014. Sisi served as Egypt's deputy prime minister. Yada yada yada. Okay, so he was born in Cairo in 1954. As a young man, he joined the Egyptian army and held a post in Saudi Arabia before enrolling in the Egyptian Army's Command and Staff College. Sisi received additional training at the Joint Services Command and Staff College in the United Kingdom in 1992 and at the United States Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania in 2006. Before becoming the Director of Military Intelligence in 2010, he served as a mechanized infantry commander. He never saw active combat throughout his military service. So that's interesting. So let me go back to this. Actually, 1 minute. Okay, so I just had to pull something up real quick. So this is from France 24. Egypt's president Abdel Fattah el-Sisi received Libyan strongman Khalifa Haftar and Parliament Speaker Aguila Salah on Tuesday. The Egyptian presidency said Haftar leads forces that have de facto control over Libya's east and part of the south, and is increasingly expected to run in the country's presidential poll later this year. So Cairo has long been seen as one of Haftar's main supporters. Egyptian intelligence chief Abbas Kamel also took part in the meeting. Egyptian presidential spokesperson Bassam Radi said, without providing details on the exchange. So in August, the U.S. ambassador of Libya, Richard Norland, traveled to Cairo to meet with Egyptian officials and Haftar as part of U.S. efforts to support Libyan parliamentary and presidential elections in December, the embassy said at the time. So oil-rich, Libya is trying to extricate itself from a decade of turmoil following the 2011 toppling of dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Isn't it so funny how they always spell Gaddafi so different? I've seen it spelled with a G, a Q, a K. It's like, okay. So in recent years, the country was split between rival administrations backed by foreign powers and myriad militias. So Haftar's forces were routed from the country's west last year, and the two camps signed a ceasefire deal in Geneva in October. So an interim government was established earlier this year to lead Libya towards December 24th parliamentary and presidential polls. So they must have some sort of presidential parliamentarian system where you have like a president and a prime minister. So Parliament Speaker Saleh last week ratified a law governing the presidential election, sparking criticism he failed to follow due process and was seeking to favor Haftar. So, Parliament Speaker last week ratified a law governing the presidential election. So Sisi in February pledged support to neighboring Libya in talks with the country's then newly appointed interim prime minister Abdullah uh, Debeba. So Abdul Hamid Debeba. So interesting. So that's actually a good article. It's actually kind of like that. So the speaker is a Saleh guy. Saleh ratified a law governing the presidential election, but he got some pushbacks. So interesting. So wow. Let me see this guy actually, Richard Norland. Wow. So Richard Boyce Norland is an American diplomat. He served as the United States ambassador to Libya. Interesting. So what was this article written actually? Curious. 2021. Okay. Interesting. Okay, President Donald Trump. Okay, so United States ambassador to Libya. So President Donald Trump nominated Richard Norland to be the United States ambassador to Libya on August 1st, 2019. The Senate confirmed his nomination by voice vote. He assumed the office in 2019. So very interesting. So think about it. Libya, very oil rich, and you had the Gaddafi government broke apart. You had all the generals, warlords vying for control. This Haftar guy kind of takes over the eastern part of the country. Um, and he has support from el-Sisi in Egypt. El-Sisi has ties to the United Kingdom and the United States. So he's probably more so on the United States sphere of hegemony and power, right? Erik Prince has a meeting in Cairo with Haftar, most likely with, of course, the Egyptian government, most likely knowing this was happening, and their intelligence knowing that is happening. So it's very interesting. And you also have this Richard Norland guy also at the meeting in which Haftar met Sisi, el-Sisi. So a Trump nominated ambassador, a U.S. Good favored president of Egypt, meeting with one of the warlords of the Libyan civil war, Haftar, and Haftar is being courted and has ties to Erik Prince through his mercenary companies, and Erik Prince is living in the United Arab Emirates, setting up these companies to basically do the weapons trafficking for Haftar. But Haftar was not impressed with the armaments that Erik Prince showed up with. And it seems that the mercenaries who showed up actually had to, in a raft, somehow like sail across the Mediterranean or something crazy like that. Wow. Didn't we read that somewhere? Like, It was somewhere. Sorry, it was fascinating when he said that. Dang it, it was somewhere. Oh, maybe it was this Financial Times ones. Here we go. Yeah. So within days of their arrival, in other words, the kind of mercenary team of Erik Prince, 20 mercenaries had to be evacuated in a hurry across the sea to Malta aboard 2 inflatable boats originally bought for the operation. What a nightmare. Could you imagine being those 20 guys? And it's just like, uh, um, wow. So I think we're good there. So what else we got here? I haven't even talked about his China stuff again. Like, all right, so here's some stuff about the Libya stuff.
Erik Prince is best known as the founder of Blackwater Security, a private contractor whose employees were implicated in the killing of 17 Iraqi civilians in 2007. He's also a prominent supporter of former President Donald Trump and brother to former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. But it's his role in a malicious assault on the internationally recognized government in Libya in 2019 that's now in question. Al Jazeera has seen excerpts of a 121-page report submitted to the UN Security Council and first reported by the New York Times, alleging Prince helped supply a trove of weapons, including attack helicopters, to the military's commander, Khalifa Haftar, in violation of a UN arms embargo on Libya. It also alleges he deployed a force of foreign mercenaries to help. The attack was condemned by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
This won't be resolved through force of arms. There's just no way that's going to take place. There's a UN process. We've been part of that. General Haftar has been part of that. We urge General Haftar to stand down, move back to the negotiating table so that we can get a political resolution in Libya.
The day after Pompeo made that statement, President Trump made a phone call to Haftar, raising eyebrows in the ire of some members of Congress. An official readout of the call said that the president, quote, recognized Field Marshal Haftar's significant role in fighting terrorism and securing Libya's oil resources. And the two discussed a shared vision for Libya's transition to a stable democratic political system, what many saw as a contradiction of official U.S. policy. The UN report raises a question not only of whether or not a close associate of the president violated an international arms embargo, but also of whether or not the president himself was complicit in defying a stated U.S. policy. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, Washington.
With our servers designed for AI, you can revolutionize the way you do business, power your workloads, and empower innovation at any scale. We meet you where you are and take you where you want to go.
It's not having access to 1 million industrial-grade products that's so amazing. It's the feeling of knowing you'll find the one you...
Lancaster 6 is fronted by Serge Durant, but is very closely linked to Erik Prince, and almost, it's not directly linked to Erik Prince on paper, but there is a track record of Erik Prince proposals in other parts of the world, like Afghanistan, where he proposes an idea, and the solution is provided by and offered by a company called Lancaster 6.
Erik Prince is well connected to the Trump administration with strong ties to the Republican Party. He's become a permanent fixture in national security circles in Washington.
His sister is the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. So he has deep, deep connections politically, financially, with this particular administration. You sort of think of him as being, under the Trump administration, a shadow Secretary of State or a shadow CIA director.
In the Mueller report, Prince was described as a trusted associate of the new administration. He was questioned over suspicions that a meeting with a Putin ally was an attempt to create a back channel between Trump and Russia.
He has had a very strong relationship with Steve Bannon, with Jared Kushner, with other members of the Trump White House. And that's the way he likes it. He likes to be sort of the gray agent, the guy that you don't really pay attention to.
In a radio interview with Steve Bannon, Erik Prince suggested resurrecting a Vietnam-era campaign of targeted assassinations of America's enemies.
It was a vicious but very effective kill capture program in Vietnam that destroyed the Viet Cong as a military force. That's what needs to be done to the funders of Islamic terror. The main tumor of this problem is in Iraq and Syria, with other metastasis, other cancer cells, if you will, in the likes of Somalia and Libya.
He talked to me about his dream of what he called an army in a box, a private army of about 1,400 to 1,700 men with intelligence, aviation, combat capability, marine, aviation, and land forces that would be dropped into places like Rwanda, Darfur, and put down uprisings.
Supported by Durant's new company, and with allies in Washington, Prince went out selling his idea of an army in a box. A force of private contractors, vehicles, boats, and aircraft. One of his first pitches was to replace almost the entire US military in Afghanistan.
The idea that 6,500 guys with some crop dusters that were armed with machine guns could somehow turn around the graveyard of empires known as Afghanistan is absurd. But there are people in Washington who are eager to hear that message. Like, we can do it in a year. Erik Prince, you seem credible somehow. We'll just do it. Even though generals laughed him out of the room.
Prince sold the plan in the US media.
Said we're not winning. The terrorist forces control almost half the country as it is now. So clearly this current strategy is not working.
Four Corners has obtained a document showing that at the same time, Durant's Lancaster 6 pitched an almost identical plan to provide air support to the Afghan military.
I think Durant does Erik's dirty work. It's what it appears to be. And Erik is smart enough to find people to do his dirty work for him. And if they get caught or it fails, I think he fully expects them either to clam up, take the heat, cash your check, and do what you're supposed to do.
I've come to sort of see that what Erik Prince has established as a business model is you use cutouts and proxies, lawyers, people to take ownership on paper of things while you have a secret verbal agreement or some other kind of secret side agreement that allows the sort of head of the organization, if you will, Mr. Prince, to control assets and direct operations.
In 2019 in Cairo, the mercenaries pitched Erik Prince's army-in-a-box plan to Libyan warlord Khalifa Haftar. Four Corners has obtained the PowerPoint used to sell him on the project. It offered assault helicopters armed with heavy machine guns and rockets to carry out airstrikes on government forces, surveillance planes to identify and track targets, and a team of paramilitary special forces.
The idea was, let's use this army in a box, gunships, mercenaries, and push, be the tip of the spear type of thing.
The PowerPoint also contained a proposed Find, Fix, Finish program, a US military term for targeted killings. The plan would use foreign mercenaries as an extraction termination team to kill or kidnap 9 of Haftar's enemies in Libya.
Normally, if you read a PowerPoint about being part of a military offensive in a place like Libya, it's a little concerning. But then when you're asked to assassinate a group of people, of which 2 are European citizens, you should be very worried, because now you're doing something completely different than just working for an army, trying to, hone their skills or move them forward. You're actually being told to find, locate, and murder people on the say-so of the person that's hiring you.
Hi, Hussam. Hussam Nader is a Libyan-Irish citizen who fought to overthrow the 4-decade dictatorship in Libya. So, Hussam, I've seen a list created by a group of Western mercenaries. It's a list of Libyans that they're accused of planning to kidnap or kill for Khalifa Haftar. He was one of the men targeted for termination.
Well, I'm not aware of this document in particular, but if that's their motive, if their motive is we're cold-blooded killers, here's a hit list, kill this guy, that's the end of it. I mean, if they are just cold-blooded killers, well, then I have nothing to say to them, whether it be targeted as me, myself, or civilians as a whole. I think it's very important that the Australian population and country understand and know that one of their citizens is being implicated in these kind of actions.
When you privatize war, anything goes, right? So the laws of armed conflict, nobody cares about. Legitimacy, it's a punching bag of a word. Suddenly, laws of supply and demand replace laws of armed conflict. Ideology, patriotism, national security, it's only as good as you can afford it.
In the weeks after the mercenaries washed up in Malta, the United Nations ramped up its investigation into the failed operation. Evidence started to float to the surface. An inflatable boat abandoned by the mercenaries as they fled Libya was found near Benghazi.
When the UN began investigating, they started pulling sales, travel records, phone records, all these things, and everything started clicking together.
Both the UN and the Federal Bureau of Investigations is currently conducting an investigation into Erik Prince for alleged arms trafficking or working with General Haftar in Libya.
The investigation run by the UN's panel of experts on Libya has already gathered 140 pages of damning evidence about the Opus team. The panel found Christian Durant was in breach of a Libyan arms embargo for at least being complicit in the planning and execution of a military operation in support of Haftar.
There's an alphabet soup of nationalities, private military contractors and mercenaries on the ground in Libya. This is a very negative and unhelpful phenomenon in the Libyan conflict. And the bottom line is all of these countries, all of these forces need to take their hands off Libya. That's the way forward.
Even after the failure of the first operation, and with the UN investigation underway, Erik Prince sent a new team to Benghazi to try again in April this year.
Now again, this story is being told by the people who were involved, and they were told to come to Dubai and just sit tight. And they were going to get paid and everything would be fine, and there was going to be another go at it, and which happens.
Investigators believe the team were in Libya for a month and were again unable to carry out their mission.
You had two cracks at the taking over Tripoli and securing obviously one of the wealthiest countries in Africa, and it failed.
The panel's investigation will go to the UN Security Council's powerful Sanctions Committee, which will decide if Durant and others should receive asset freezes and travel bans.
I think all of the work of the panel is extremely important, but it's what is done with all of that. And when it hits the Sanctions Committee, what do the member states do? How are the violators of the arms embargo held accountable?
Four Corners can confirm the Australian government has the UN reports. If Durant is charged in Australia, he could face up to 10 years in jail and fines of $500,000.
It is exceptionally serious that former Australian military are applying the skills that have been granted to them by our community and our government for potentially criminal, certainly immoral things. In the way we control the threat of guns in our society by controlling the way guns are accessed, that perhaps should be something that should be considered about the way that military people are allowed to be employed.
If an Australian citizen takes up arms, provides military advice and services to overthrow a legitimate UN-represented government, also a Western-supported government, for profit, what's the next government? What's the next job? What's the next mission that they will concoct? That's how serious this question is.
Durant refused an interview, but told Four Corners in a statement, "We don't breach sanctions, we don't deliver military services, we don't carry guns, and we are not mercenaries." He also said the UN investigation is relying on false documents, and he remains friends with Erik Prince, but has no business relationship with him.
I think by going and digging all the way and not stopping on the investigation, it's likely that you can find out much more about the bigger sort of ecosystem of weapons smuggling and mercenary operations, not just in Libya, but everywhere on the African continent and in parts of the Middle East. So I think the Libya investigation is sort of it's like the tip of the iceberg.
If the UN sanctions Durant and the others, it will send a strong message to bands of mercenaries who profit from killing. If the UN doesn't act, it will embolden the shadowy world of guns for hire.
we're heading towards a world where military might is something you buy and sell in a marketplace, and it doesn't observe the laws of war, but the laws of economics. And now we're going to get to a point where warfare is no longer the exclusive domain of states. It'll be the domain of the global 0.01%, whether they're individuals or the Fortune 500. And that will change who has power in international relations as we know it.
The prospect of fighting in Libya also means that you become complicit in human rights abuses, and that you yourself, the fighters themselves are responsible for very serious human rights violations. And even though currently the cost is zero and nobody's being held to account, but that will change at some point. At some point, there will be accountability, or so we hope.
Wow. So I'm gonna get ready to wrap this up actually, and yeah. So this is honestly just the first part about Erik Prince. We haven't even gotten to his Chinese ventures. So think about that. Erik Prince. We know he was Blackwater in Iraq. He was in that Seychelles Islands with Kirill Dmitriev on behalf of the UAE, but also George Nader, who was a Trump ally, and then later also a convicted pedophile. And then we also have the Libya stuff, and then also his idea with Steve Bannon to try to privatize the military for Afghanistan. So we have not even gotten to the Chinese stuff yet. So more to come on that. Thank you for listening, and we're just gonna wrap it up for right now at least. All right, so take care. All right, bye.